To kill other human beings, you have to be dehumanized so you can dehumanize the other.
The purpose of war is to unalive other people.
The other that one is deployed against is not a human being. If it came down to him or me, it was going to be him,
right?
Because I was going home.
They think they're doing good for God.
Of course.
And they think they're serving God.
Yeah. Who think that it glorifies God to behead civilians. Different animal. All murders are killings, but not all killings are murders.
To help us to understand that he's there and we're not alone.
Has lost 20 guys from his company to suicide because they just can't live with what they've done.
You can be manly, but also devoted to Christ in ways in which our culture does not permit. One of the mortars, and it blew to pieces and shredded everybody in the mortar pit. You can't live as an autonomous moral agent when you're responsible to the one who establishes all of morality himself.
Dear God, thanks again for having my friend Foye here and mentor. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. If we could just reach one person and change their life or influence it from the better, and then they could do that for someone else, then it's a win, Lord. Thank you for this time. Speak through us and move through us. Amen.
Amen.
Awesome, brother. So we've done 3 installments of this.
3 installments.
And then I was talking to our friend Reed, and he's like, you never talked about Foye's military career. I've heard some stories, and they're really good, and they could apply to a lot of the stuff that we previously already talked about. So I put together a list of a few questions. Go as deep as you want, as detailed as you want,
okay,
as graphic as you want. Anything that you think that will really touch people and help them, we're happy to hear. I wanted to know your faith journey and your walk with Christ. Did that start prior to joining the Marine Corps? Was it after, during? Kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian family and came to know Jesus as a young child. But our church had some problems. And we had a couple of pastors that committed some sins that cost them their ministry. And I, in my later teen years, decided if they couldn't do it, then I didn't want to either. So, some immaturity there, as you would expect in a teenager's processing. My faith, I think, was more in the messenger rather than the message at that point. So I just decided to chuck my faith, and that was right before I graduated high school and went into the Marine Corps, right when Gulf War I was going down.
And that's 91?
90 into 91.
90 to 91. And you were how old when you went in?
I signed up when I was 17, and I was just 18 when I went in.
What prompted you to do that? Because that's early. That's early to be like, I want to serve my country. Or how do you get there?
Yeah, I always had like a martial spirit, I would say. I always was attracted to kind of like that archetypal warrior, protector, defender kind of trajectory. And then again, the things that, we watch and view and cherish as a child shape us as well. So those were the days of Captain America comic books, James Tiberius Kirk on
Rescue
television.
Dawn.
All of that stuff, man. Airwolf, all of it. So I was saturated with those kinds of figures in my life, and I wanted to make a difference. And part of that was serving something greater than myself.
Wow.
So that was kind of in the atmosphere that I came up in. And then our family had military service as well. My grandfather was in World War I. 2 of my father's older brothers were in World War II. And then he and his youngest brother were in Korea.
So I wanted to ask you, so it was no surprise or no alarm when you said, hey, I'm going to serve the country as well?
To my parents?
Yeah, how did they take it?
They didn't take it well, to be honest, especially my dad, which was surprising to me. Most all of our family was drafted. They didn't enlist, they were drafted, but they answered the call, which is different than how things developed later in the Vietnam War, for sure. I think my dad was less concerned. I mean, my mom would have been concerned either way,
Right.
of me going into the military and the possibility
Of course, being a mom.
yeah, being a mom, you know. My dad just thought I was being a word that's not probably appropriate for this audience, where I said I wanted to go into the Marines rather than the Army or the Air Force, which was our family tradition. So he told me in no uncertain terms I'd watched too many John Wayne movies, and
Wow.
yeah, he didn't want to sign for me, but he did.
What if you had done the same branch as the Army that he did, would he have been a little more supportive?
I think he probably would have been, because there's this stereotype that Marines are killers, you know. And unfortunately, even to today, when there's mass shootings in somebody's prior service, they always ask, was that person, you know, a Marine or in the special forces? And oftentimes they are. So
That's interesting, because from the perspective of a civilian serving the country, we see you guys as men and women serving the country. I don't really see the politics in terms of like different branches, but I would imagine when you get immersed in it,
yeah,
it's political camaraderie, ball breaking, kind of like, oh, you're in that branch. Oh, that branch is this or this.
I've got a couple of Green Beret buddies of mine who are retired now. We bust each other's chops about who's tougher all the time. I mean, you and I had some back and forth before the segment about the Navy SEALs and their PR department.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of barracks humor is what we call it, where we bust each other's chops and, you know, have shooting competitions and who can do the most push-ups and those things.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, when you get the phone call, we're on the same team.
When Mel Gibson says in, what's that? He did a movie like 15 years ago when they go overseas to Vietnam, but he says that's where the metal meets the meat. And my dad looked at me when we're watching that movie and we're like, fuck. Like, that's when the ranking and all that just disappears. Bullets are flying, I can imagine. And no one's looking at, you're all the same.
We're fighting together.
You're fighting together.
Yeah.
Just as scared, just as concerned.
Yep.
Worrying about the next guy, regardless of his title or anything like that.
Exactly.
How did what some defining moments that tested your belief? Because you kind of walked away from the church prior to enlisting, but there must have you walked away from the religion side, the political side. Did you really walk away from like the belief or the relationship with Christ, or had it not matured or developed at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just as I left home, left my father behind physically, when I went into the military, looking back, that's really how I was approaching my religious faith too. Like I was leaving God behind, but God refuses to be left behind. He goes with us wherever we go. And there were multiple moments throughout my time in the military where I sensed his close presence. I think all of us, or many of us, I should say, that's probably more accurate, when we're in boot camp and being deconstructed and dehumanized in some ways, because to kill other human beings, you have to be dehumanized so you can dehumanize the other in order to take their life. There were multiple times where I just remember going late at night on fire watch in the rack when I couldn't sleep and just talking to God, not sure he was listening, which again was immaturity. Of course he was listening. I was projecting on him the nature of the relationship that I was having with him. He wasn't viewing me in that same lens. So I felt bad about asking, but I asked anyways, as many of us do in those situations, whether it's in boot camp or deployments. We have defining moments. And I remember, one of the things that I can talk about, I was deployed to Guantanamo Bay right after Maria and I got married. And the unit that I had been attached to hadn't even been deployed. I was in the reserves at this point for Vietnam. So I thought it was a safe gig, get married, start a family, all of that. And within about 4 weeks of us getting married, I got a phone call, show up tomorrow with your bag packed. And when we got there, it was, not only was it pretty primitive conditions, even for a mud Marine, guys that are in the infantry like I was, but there were a lot of Haitians and Cubans that had been imprisoned there, picked up at sea, and who were not happy about it. And there were numerous occasions where we had confrontations with the inmates, for lack of a better word, and several of them were very physical. And I remember heading back to the compound and thinking, some of these people had weapons, and that could have been it.
Right. Why do you think you were talking about there's a moment where you're by yourself in the evening and you started talking with God, the defining moment? It's interesting whether we're close with God or we reject God. I'm noticing a pattern with humans that we all end up coming at some point to the end of ourselves, to some defining moment. I see this a lot with my age. As a civilian, I'll see it in the context of a relationship ends.
Yeah.
And then someone will go to church a few times. In your case, life-threatening situation.
Yeah.
And then there's just something about these defining moments that I feel like my observation says that we all look for God at some point.
I think you have to come to the end of yourself in order to do that. And God, being God, orchestrates the circumstances of our lives so that we're presented with our need for Him. And in those moments of recognizing that we are not enough, we reach out to the hand that's stretched out to us, like in the Sistine Chapel, with God reaching down to man. That's what He's doing all the time. He's reaching down to us. But when we are self-satisfied and self-sufficient and caring for our own needs, and we think that we're enough, we don't need God. And that's part of the reason why Western civilization has deteriorated to the point where it is currently, not just in Europe, but here in the States too, because a lot of white, wealthy, well-educated people don't think they need God until He brings them to their knees. And then those circumstances cause us to come face to face with the ontological fact that we are not enough and we need Him. And that's where change happens and transformation begins.
You know, you mentioned, obviously, you're in war, and the Marine Corps and Navy SEALs are killing machines. I once heard, I had a friend who served time. He went to prison for a while. And one of the things he says, you never ask someone else what they're in for. It's disrespectful. And everyone knows that. You just don't talk about that.
Yeah.
But I was also told, with someone who's in the military, there's a question that you don't ask also.
Of course.
Yeah. But, so I'm not going to ask you that out of respect for you. But how do you face, the purpose of war is to unalive other people. And how do you reconcile a relationship with God who's loving and says we're all brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yeah.
And that, the war machine?
Well, I mean, as I said before, there has to be a certain process of dehumanization that has to occur, first in boot camp and then in successive training environments, where the other that one is deployed against or is going to fight against is not a human being. They're the enemy. They're the adversary. They're animals, whatever. And you need to be able to look at the other through that lens to be able to take their lives, because we're hardwired not to do those things. Because the other, whether they're a jihadi or a Japanese soldier or whatever, is also created in the Imago Dei, in the image of God, and are worthy of honor and respect. So I think there's a reason why people are recruited to serve in the military from 18 to 22, because your frontal lobe hasn't fully developed by then. age.
Could you be able to, with your maturity and your theology background now, 20, 30 years, would you be able to be in that same circumstance and, for lack of a better word, justify having to do these things?
It's funny you should ask that, because I was just somebody called me the other day and said that they wanted to talk, which was unusual because I barely knew this individual, and they wanted to talk about the mass shootings that are happening in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And what I thought about that as a prior service Marine, and specifically because several of these recent stories highlighted that the alleged shooters were prior service Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up talking about the new reality in the world in which we live, where violence can erupt at any time.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could break into the studio right now with a firearm, and what would one do? So my answer to this individual was, if I had family members with me, or if there were other civilians around me, I would do what I could to ensure their safety, and then I would neutralize
mm-hmm.
that individual who is perpetrating the crime. And it could cost me my life, and it might cost them theirs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that gets hardwired into our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And as we get older, we recognize the value of human life, even in perpetrators, but also the need to care for the innocent lives around us. So the way I justified it in the military was, if it came down to him or me, it was going to be him,
right,
because I was going home.
Okay.
And I think that's how a lot of us look at it. Or it was going to be him rather than the guy behind me or beside me, because that person was my brother, and that fellow across the field is an adversary,
Yeah, I mean, I get the picture you just painted about the violence that can occur in everyday life, but war specifically, the guy on the other side,
yeah.
I'm guessing, thinks he's the good guy, and they're fighting an enemy that's evil.
Yeah.
And because then it could very easily get into this philosophical idea of morality, of who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
So I struggle to see, how does God play into this? When you say jihad, right? We're fighting the jihad. Well, as a civilian, I grew up in the media. Jihad is bad.
Yeah.
They're bombing people. The doctrine that they follow is evil. But they think they're doing good for God.
Of course.
And they think they're serving God.
Yeah.
So where I sit, someone who's never served, it's hard to, I get why that's the way we're built. That's the way we're wired. When words don't work,
yeah.
that's what we go to. And we all pray that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between killing and murder? And does God make any distinction of that in the Bible?
I think I need to be super careful how I address this, because if there's any vets who are going to be watching this afterwards, they're super sensitive about that topic. Let me take it back just a bit. One of the guys who influenced me significantly when I went to seminary and when I was a pastor early on, his name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So he was a German during World War II, a pastor and a theologian. And many of his students at his seminary were conscripted by the German army to fight for Hitler. So you either accepted your conscription or you went to a concentration camp. So there were many of those German young men who did not want to fight, who did not want to kill French and American and British soldiers.
They were slaves, effectively.
They were slaves, effectively. So to dehumanize them devalues the convictions they had and the very hard choices that they had to make. To me, that feels different than, and again, I'm just going to use the language I know, and hopefully it's not offensive, Muslim fanatic jihadis who think that it glorifies God to behead civilians. Different animal.
Right.
But at the same time, what you said is true. They believe what they're doing is glorifying God somehow, according to their belief system. So in that sense, they're following through on their belief structure. With regard to killing and murder, all murders are killings,
right?
But not all killings are murders. And the way that I understand that has been shaped by the early church father, St. Augustine, who was the bishop of Hippo in North Africa in the 5th century. And he promulgated what he would call a just war theory, where war is the last result, where war is conducted with rules of engagement that protect civilians and other non-combatants. And the Geneva Convention and even our own rules of engagement in the U.S. military today, in many ways, reflect a lot of what this pastor and bishop and theologian talked about 1,500 years ago. I think there are a lot of guys that I know who ended a lot of lives and don't lose any sleep over it because of what they saw some of these guys do.
The adversaries.
Yeah. With the murdering of innocent women.
I wanted to...
Things like that. But there are other guys I know who have taken other people's lives, who are immensely troubled and are suffering with incredible amounts of PTSD over it. One of my best friends, who's a prior service Green Beret, actually, and a pastor now, has lost 20 guys from his company to suicide because they just can't live with what they've done. And I don't think a lot of civilians understand. They benefit from the blessings of liberty and the protection of their freedoms, but they don't realize what a toll it takes on the guys who are pulling the triggers.
I was at a party in college or high school, later years in high school, with a buddy of mine, and everyone's having fun. You know, younger, drinking, what you do at house parties.
Yep.
And there was a kid that was standing over by the lake at night, just staring up at the stars and the lake. Just completely a buzz killer. And one of the guys in the background said, what's this kid's deal? What is he doing? And they said, oh, he was just overseas. He was on tour. It might have been shortly after 2008, then 2009.
Yeah.
I was in early years of college.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just did a tour. And me and my buddy looked at each other like,
yeah.
You know, we can't, we're there drinking and having fun, doing what what society says you should be doing, then not like suffering and lost our youth and lost our childhood effectively from that. I want to take a break, and when we get back in, I want to talk to you about, there's got to be a couple moments that while you were serving that really stand out.
Yeah.
I want to hear about those.
Okay, cool.
Let's hear something pivotal, something that stands out during your time in that.
Yeah. I think probably, there's a number of things that I could share, but the thing that stands out immediately to me is that when I was in my last Marine Corps unit, which happened to be in the reserves, we had a new platoon sergeant show up. So this is the guy who's kind of oversees the platoon. We had 4 of them in our infantry company. He was in charge of our weapons platoon because I was tasked with machine guns and mortars. And there was just something different about him. His name was Brian, and he could do more push-ups than any of us. He could shoot better than any of us. He was like the poster boy.
A real life Captain America.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I'm like looking at this guy like, who are you? Where'd you come from? And there are certain behaviors that are endemic to the military lifestyle, with overindulgence with alcohol and all of the other behaviors that are attendant to that are not helpful for families. And he just never participated in any of that. And I went up to him one day and I'm like, hey, Staff Sergeant, I see you're not going to the bar and you're not going to the massage parlor and you're not going to this place and that place with all of the rest of the guys when we're on liberty. So what's the deal with that? He's like, I'm a Christian. I don't do that kind of stuff. And I went, whoa.
Were you you must have been like, you're a military guy, goody two-shoe, like, did you?
No, I mean, were there guys in the platoon that probably thought that? I'm sure.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I felt like God reached down and touched me, Mark, and said, see, you can be a warrior.
Wow.
And not all of the other behaviors that you think are attached.
Not the barbaric, I might die tomorrow, so he isn't tonight.
Exactly. And from that moment forward, Ryan and I were fast friends, and he really became a mentor to me in many ways. He and I are still friends to this day, and I'll probably send him this podcast when it's done. And I mean, he spent 35 years in the military between active and reserve. He ended up a master sergeant in the Marine Corps and ended up having to get out. So he went back in to the Army because the Army would take him as like a corporal or a sergeant. Mm-hmm. You don't know what that kind of that is, like stepping down from being like the next in charge of a company to the guys pushing pencils in the mailroom, just because it was part of his DNA and just because the guys that he was serving with were his people. So God used Brian and his story was phenomenal. He'd gone to a small religious college and had become a missionary in South America and ended up having to go to the U.S. Embassy, and Marines guard their embassies around the world, and saw some Marines there. And he's like, for whatever reason, when I get out, I'd call it God's providence. He probably would too. When I get done with my missionary commitment, I'm going into the Marine Corps. And that's what he did.
Now, how long had you been working with Brian?
4 or 5 years, I'd say. Yeah.
Was that a pivotal point in the relationship with God when you met him then?
Absolutely.
Change your outlook on?
Yeah. I think God uses real life incarnational interruptions is what I call them. Like people he sends into our lives to help us to understand that he's there and we're not alone. And when I met Brian, I recognized the reality of both of those things, that he was present and had been the whole time, and that I wasn't alone. So when the guys went out on the town and did all of those things, Brian and I went to the mall, bought our wives some Celine Dion CDs, called them on the phone, hung out and had a couple beers in the hotel room. But that was the extent of it. He really helped me to come back to my faith by living it out without forcing it down my throat and showing me that you can be manly, but also devoted to Christ in ways in which our culture does not permit.
What are some of the leadership lessons that you learned in the Marines that you've been able to apply to ministry?
Yeah, what a great question. I think for the first one would be the value of the chain of command. And
explain that to the civilian.
So in the military, you're responsible to the next person above you, and they're responsible to the next person above them. And the chain of authority and direction flows down, and obedience flows up. So the kingdom of God is very similar. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have a picture of God where he's like a kindly grandfather, or the Santa Claus in the sky, or a genie that you rub the lamp and you get what you want. And he's not. He's the king. He's the one who's in charge. He's the creator. He's the redeemer. He's the recreator. He's the one who saves us from our own debauchery, sin. So that idea of chain of command is easily translatable into what it looks like to live in the kingdom. You can't live as an autonomous moral agent when you're responsible to the one who establishes all of morality himself. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that I learned that was transferable is you take care of your men. They eat first, you eat last. They get the gear before you do. You make sure that they're equipped and they're comfortable so they can accomplish the mission. As a clergy person, I want to make sure that the people in the church have everything that they need to accomplish the mission. Certainly that's a regular gathering of encouragement, a diet in the Word of God, and sharpening and discipleship and small community, all of those things. That certainly was something that I learned in the Marines as well. A third thing that was easily transferable was that you can only take as much ground as the weakest man can advance. So we don't leave anybody behind. In the family of God in the church, we've got to recognize that people are in all different stages of spiritual development in their journey, and we can't leave anybody behind. So we've got to resource that individual for sure. And like in the Marines, if somebody couldn't carry their pack any longer, if we're on a 20 or 30 or 50 mile march or something like that, you get to the point where you just can't carry your 100-pound pack anymore. So somebody else carries it for you. So they're carrying their 100 pounds and your 100 pounds too.
Was it difficult you took these tools from the military and you go into ministry and you can apply these on an individual basis?
Yeah.
But you're working with civilians.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect between civilians and the military.
Because civilians don't get it, man.
We don't. To some degree, to a lot of degree, we don't. I mean, like the accountability aspect, the picking up someone's pack, because when you look in the workforce, no, it's all about me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to gatekeep information for my glory, not to help the greater good. And that's the workforce. I like that you equated, you talked about leaders, you last, and Simon Sinek, he's a speaker and an author.
He writes. Yeah.
He wrote Leaders Eat Last.
Yep.
And he always uses examples of men and women in the military and how that's how we ought to run companies.
Yeah.
Because the structure is so effective, and it's about a servitude. It's not about how can I get my raise, how can I get my promotion. It's about how can I help the person above me or below me, the guy above me, do his job better and shine, and how can I teach the person below me my job so they can shine.
Right.
And it'll help me in my job in the end. But it's a different attitude and different mentality, and I always admire that about the service, the way it's set up.
Yeah, and corporatism is based on dog eat dog, where somebody's trying to slip extra weight into your pack so that you will fall out, so that they can step on top of you and move ahead in the stack. And if somebody falls out in the military in the march, we're not going anywhere. We've got to rectify that immediately. So I think that's why corporate America loves military guys and tries to integrate them into their particular endeavor, whatever that may be. And when we foster a communal ethos where whether it's the need of the nation or the advancement of the corporate entity that we're working for, we recognize the fact that when we work together, when we collaborate, effectiveness goes up, profit goes up, job satisfaction goes up. All of the things that make great companies great are based on that communitarian ethos that many of us learned in the service.
And yet it's so difficult to get that. I think it starts with leadership. Leadership has to
for sure
less about profits and more about the service that's being provided. How can I serve the clientele, one, and then how can I serve my employees so they can better serve the clientele? The biggest distinction that's pretty clear between the military and a civilian life and a typical standard job is that you're not worried about dying when you go to work, the average person. And I think, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's why that works in the military, but it's so hard to apply in the normal world. Is it because in the military, if you screw up, it means lives and death, whereas in the workplace, no one's life is on the line. Like, how do we how do we is that one of the factors? And how do we transition to have a more military-like environment in terms of working together?
Yeah. Let me backtrack just for a minute. I think the fourth lesson that would be helpful for your listeners is I call it the hit by the bus method. So you've got to be preparing apprentices behind you, people who can fill in cross-training, those kinds of things, in case something happens to you so that the mission carries on, right? So I think that in successful corporate entities, that if I get hit by a bus perspective is being practiced, then there is 2 and 3 people deep on the bench to be able to move the mission forward. And to go to what you said last about there aren't lives on the line, I think there are lives on the line in the corporate sector, and they're the lives of the workers and their families and their children, their destiny. And just because you don't think about it or you don't necessarily care about it doesn't mean that this doesn't have real world impacts on a host of individuals that can upend whole trajectories of families and a person's desire to move and grow in whatever lane that they've been walking in. So I think the best managers will recognize that they need to create space where the lives that they're shepherding have an opportunity to flourish, and that trickles down into families. Because when people are happy and well adjusted and their needs are met, then they're better workers. So that's one way of looking at it. And unfortunately, there's another way of looking at it where we just use people up, throw them on the trash bin, you're fired. And then we get somebody out of college or grad school to plug the hole, we use them up, they're fired, and the vicious cycle continues. So it's a challenge, and it requires both ethics and morality to navigate. Again, I would say that the best corporations, let's take Warren Buffett for an example, right? He's a man who's incredibly financially savvy, but also recognizes the value of human beings in his corporations. So the problem is that we want to be as successful as Warren, but without adopting some of the methodology that he espouses to treat people ethically and honestly as human beings that have worth.
Tell me about a time in the military where you were genuinely just absolutely terrified for your life.
Honestly, there were a couple of times during boot where I was afraid that I would lose my life, whether it was on the gun range or on the grenade range. There was another circumstance.
Boot camp, like training. Training.
Because you're training with live rounds.
Can you talk about some of this?
So when you're learning to be a warrior, you have to use the tools in the training process that you're going to use in the field or on mission. So there were several occasions, once when there was live machine gun fire going up over the top of us while we were crawling along the ground in the mud and the water, trying to replicate what it would be like to advance under fire in the midst of barbed wire and other obstacles. And there were situations where recruits would panic and stand up and take a round. Didn't happen in my series, thank God for that. The grenade range. So when you pull the pin on the grenade, the instructor will make you wait until it's time to throw it, but that thing can blow up on your hand if you're not exerting as much pressure on it as you should, or if you don't throw it as far away as you should. So I remember breaking out in a cold sweat there during that point.
I'm sweating now from this.
Yeah. Another time, again, training related. This is real-time scenarios where we were on the mortar range And mortars are those tubes that launch explosive projectiles, sometimes for quite some distance. And with the Marines, we don't have as much money available to us as some of the other services. So we use the same training material again and again and again. And the series in front of me was practicing 81 millimeter mortars. So those are mortars this big around and stand about this type, tall off the ground, with some significant explosive charges attached to the training rounds. And there was a crack in one of the mortars, and it blew to pieces and shredded everybody in the mortar pit. In training.
Yeah, that's why I'm just...
In training. So those things happen. So you're dealing with weapons that are capable of not just dealing death to the adversary, but to you yourself if you're not properly prepared.
And this is, you go into training knowing that you could lose your life in training?
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
You're Amtrak. So when you learn to do amphibious assault, that's what Marines do. They're like small covered trucks, essentially, that drop into the water off of a ship.
Yeah.
And sometimes they go right to the bottom and everybody drowns.
And that's it.
It's over.
You don't have like divers in there waiting to...
No. Doesn't happen very often, but it could happen, So we had, when I was in, we had the Osprey vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which would take up just straight up off the ground like this and then fly forward. And they would crash regularly, and they transported a lot of infantry Marines. So anytime you got into one of those, might be the last time you might never see your family again. And those are just training missions.
So in training, you've seen people lose their life?
I haven't, but I know people who have. And then, of course, when you're deployed on missions, whether they're humanitarian or combat, I think people think that combat missions are the only dangerous missions there are. Our humanitarian missions, where we're caring for people's physical needs, oftentimes they don't want us to be there, and they don't want us to do it. And violence can erupt very easily. I think even in the news recently, where with the Israelis and the Palestinians and the food distribution, people get killed.
Let's talk about that for a second. Why are we there?
Because politicians send us there. The military doesn't execute. The military executes the missions that its civilian leadership tasks it with. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff is responsible. So again, for your listeners, the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the head of each branch of the service: Army, Marine Corps, Navy,
and they've
Air Force. And they serve. They're active duty, usually 4-star generals or admirals.
Okay.
But their chain of command extends to the Secretary of Defense, who's a civilian who is responsible to the President of the United States, who's also a civilian. And those are the checks and balances that our founding fathers put into place to prevent the military from being used inappropriately, or for the military to manipulate the government of the country the way that it has happened around the world so often and is happening today.
It seems like a major disconnect to have a civilian who's never seen combat make decisions for men that are in combat. I get the checks and balances, the idea of checks and balances, but because I get that if it were just a bunch of military men, they probably make decisions differently, good or bad. But then to make decisions like this, you're effectively a suit and tie politicians.
Yeah.
Asking young guys to go die for people that don't even want you there. Is there a certain point? It looks inhumane in a sense, like a lot of times we're using people as pawns, and this is really not about morality or good and evil. What I'm getting at is, and what we hear is there's a lot of profit involved. Probably not the nicest reasons to be occupying places.
Yeah.
And I understand you guys get deployed and you have a job, you do your job. That's the job.
Right.
Doesn't seem right in some circumstances. I mean, were you ever over there like thinking, I'm here to do a job, but on a high level, we shouldn't be here?
I think we all think that at some time or another. A couple of things. I just like the best officers in the military were enlisted men first, so they know what it looks like to be the enlisted guy. I think in many occasions, the best leadership that we have are prior service folks. So if you just look at some of our presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, others who served, they know the cost of war. They know the sacrifice that families make to send their young men and women abroad in harm's way. And I think are much less inclined towards fruitless political endeavor. Having said that, I don't think you have to be in the military to be a good leader, but you have to have a respect for what the military does and the cost that is incurred, not by politicians or civilians, many of whom would not permit their children to do what they're sending other people's children to do, right? But like anything else in this world, Mark, motivation is a mixed bag. Do I think that our country has a history of valuing freedoms and desiring freedom for people around the globe? Yes, I really do. But we also act in our own national interest, right? So the first rule in corporate America is perpetuation of the corporation, right? So you do what is necessary for the corporation to succeed. Nation states are exactly the same way. Wherever their interests are, that's what's going to get the focus. So right now, because our interests are in the Gulf, that's where our focus is. That's where the money is. That's where the connections are. Our current president wants to elicit many of those people to invest in America. So he's giving them face time and attention and addressing their needs in a quid pro quo arrangement. So, and again, in Africa doesn't have anything that we need other than maybe some rare earth minerals here or there, or maybe we're in a contest with the Chinese. Nobody really cares about Africa because we have no interest there. Right. But if we did, we'd have troops there. The eye of our political machine and our military industrial complex would be geared towards that area. A nation state pursues its own self-interest first. And our military is a projection of that. And that sounds crass on some level, but that's the reality of it. We can be absolutely convinced of the reality and efficacy of our means of government. And at the same time, we'll want to put money in our pocket.
I was just listening to a lecture, but there's British, even today, they occupy places in somewhere in Central America, in Guatemala. It's one of those places. And I don't remember exactly why, but it was some type of natural resource that's there. Because you're like, British, Central America?
Yeah.
It had something to do with a natural resource. So basically the story goes, they took over the country in that area and just stole it from the nationals there. And then create whatever story or media spin, say, this is why we care about this tiny country in Central America.
That's the legacy of colonization. You know, the larger, stronger nations subject the smaller, less able to resist nations for the larger nations' benefit. And, you know, Britain was a prime example of that. The empire in which the sun never set. is what it was called, because they had territorial and colonial possessions all around the world, which is mind-boggling because Great Britain is a very small island.
I was reading they're the largest. They have more territory than Genghis Khan. 70% of the entire world.
More than anyone at any time.
Ever. More than Russia ever had, more than China, more than anyone has ever had. And it's super quiet. It's like everybody would say, Britain? Really? The British?
Yeah.
You said it's tiny country.
Tiny little island, but the key to that was their navy. You control the seas, you control trade, and you can subject nations because of that. And the Brits did it highly effectively. So that's why today, in the Pentagon right now, they're thinking about who's controlling the seas. Is it going to be us or is it going to be the Chinese? And they're preparing for war with the Chinese right now.
So what's one tip or advice you would give to someone of the younger generation? They're thinking about enlisting or going to school and then being an officer.
Right.
What's a piece of advice that you would give them? They're thinking about joining. You've had an amazing military career and then a career to follow. You've got a lot of knowledge to pass to them. What would you tell them? You're in an elevator with someone, you've got 30 seconds. What are you saying to this kid who wants to join the military?
Yeah, I think in a culture where there is no security anymore, nobody works for the same company for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, much less 30 years. The military is a great opportunity for people to work 20 years and get a pension, have medical care for life, to springboard into corporate endeavor in fields that they might be interested in, love. It grants benefits for them and their family, pays for education. I mean, limitless. I mean, home loans, all kinds of stuff that just aren't present in a lot of corporate pay and compensation structures these days. I would speak to that, but I would also speak to the fact that if they're longing for purpose, transcendence, impact, the military is a great place to find it, where you're learning about honor, courage, commitment, those things greater than oneself, where you get to learn discipline and scheduling and learning how to be cool under fire, whether that's in the office or in the battle space. All of those things are incredibly attractive to civilian employers afterwards, particularly if you're an officer, because you have learned chain of command, because you have learned how to take care of people around you, because you have learned to develop a code of ethics that's going to guide you in your behavior, not perfectly, but more often than not. So those are some of the things that I would encourage young people to do, or to evaluate as they make decisions.
Hold it.
So
Test one. Awesome. Perfect timing.
Look at that. You might have to edit that one out.
You have to hold it. It won't
go back, huh? Okay. What's up, bro?
What's up? Check it. That was perfect timing. Mike, God was like, you're done.
That's it. The mic dropped.
The mic literally dropped. Well said, my man. Well, I want to thank you. This is the fourth podcast you've done. I want to thank you on behalf of the entire Gilded Minds podcast organization, which is me. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you took a lot of time out of your day. Let's reading your resume. Last podcast, you're a very busy man. So it's a privilege to have you speak to the audience and to have you privately to myself. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.
Thanks for watching this episode of Gilded Minds podcast. If you want to see more content just like this, hit this video right here. And if you want to support this channel, go ahead and subscribe right here. It's free. Drop a like on the video and leave a comment and get involved in the community. Everything helps this channel. Thank you so much.